Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome back, finally, to Let's Remember Suikoden 3. This has been a long delay. Too long of a delay. And I first want to apologize because I want to be playing this game. I want to be sharing this game with you, but I got really busy. I haven't published in this playlist since, I think, last November. I think it's at least since last year. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which we'll talk about, not to sort of defend my lack of play, but to at least explain what's been going on with me to get you up onto par with everything, so you understand sort of what my situation is and how that will affect doing series like this in the future. Today, we get to go and look at Chris's Chapter 2, which is super exciting. I'm very glad that before we had our extended break, intentional break or not, we'll call it a break. Before we had our break, we got to do Ch.2's Chapter 2, which does a lot for building the larger narrative plot, right? We're sort of introduced to our main antagonist. We get a little bit more information about the broader political issues that are happening with Harmonia and how that is affecting Zexen and the Grasslands. And Ch.2's Chapter 2 is such a nice change from Ch.2's Chapter 1, which is fairly basic up until the Karia incident. And then that sort of gives it that big boost that it needs. Not even the Lizard clan stuff in the Great Hollow really has as much sort of zest or drive forward as we have in Chapter 2, when we're finally sort of going around and trying to follow the masked bishop and see what he's up to, and having that antagonist really balance that out. But also having that antagonist, not only did it sort of give Ch.2's chapter a little bit more kick and a little bit more focus, it also just gave the story a little bit more of a general focus. It's fine to have a story that focuses on ideas and nations and all of that sort of stuff, and I'm just wandering around for the sake of wandering around. And that's what this game mostly does for a while. But to sort of know that there's something going on behind the scenes, which, I mean, if anybody's played games within the genre, then they'll know, or particularly games within the series, then they'll definitely know that things are not as they seem. Look at me just running around. Vine dels Exe. Having a antagonist in a story, even a story that is supposed to focus on nebulous things such as gender politics and national politics, and this game even has a little bit to say about economics with the way that Zexen is this confederacy of free traders. All those things are great, but having an antagonist to sort of center our myth arc behind, our mystery on right now, is really nice. Sort of, who is this man behind the mask? Why does he want to destabilize these countries? That's great, and I'm glad we got to do that with Ch.2, and I've just rambled about it for way too long. With Chris and with Hugo, we get to examine the world again from the viewpoint of people who are sort of living in that world, right? Ch.2 is very detached. He's not really involved with everything, even though we now know that he has plenty of reason to be involved with everything. He's sort of still this mercenary off to the side. And Chris and Hugo aren't, and Chris and Hugo are, at least for me, a little bit more fun to play as because they are two characters who are essentially dealing with some of the same stuff, but they deal with it in radically different ways, right? So on a really broad level, right? Let's be as broad as we possibly can. What are Chris and Hugo's storylines about? Well, they're about performance, right? So they are about sort of having expectations thrust upon you, cultural expectations, and how you deal with those expectations and sort of how those things shape your own behaviors and how that pressure affects how you react in a crisis, how it affects how you react with other people in your day-to-day life, how it affects you within a broader political system. That's what Chris and Hugo's chapters are really about. They're both acting out two things, right? One of it is that they're performing out masculinity, right? In the sense, there's two senses in the way that sort of goes on, right? With Chris, she is a woman, a very capable, intelligent, strong woman who, regardless of how intelligent or capable or strong she is, needs to live up to a masculine ideal, and because she possesses feminine qualities, right? She's never going to be welcome in that space. And I don't mean just like, oh, hey, she's a girl. I mean, like, she has a certain patience and grace that maybe isn't as apparent and sort of accessible to her peers, right? And that's not to say that those things are necessarily hyper-gendered things, but they are things that are sort of feminine in their broadest shapes and forms, at least when we sort of intellectualize them on a cultural level. And so the big thing with Chris is that no matter how capable she is, no matter how much of, how good of a soldier she is, how much of that sort of ideal she lives out, she's never going to be welcome in certain spaces by virtue of just who she is, like literally who she is, and the qualities that she sort of holds that make her an outsider, right? This is probably where Suikoden 3's at its most explicitly political, outside of dealing with some of the the actual national stuff, the issues between borders and things like that. But really, when you examine Chris, you're looking at what does it mean to be a woman in a man space. Now, we have to understand that this sort of examination is also colored by the fact that this is an Eastern RPG, and that sort of has certain affectations, particularly when it comes to gender, that might not be present in other games. So it's always good to keep that in mind. But Chris, it's examining gender as a way to examine how somebody may or may not fit the role of a protagonist, right? With Hugo, it's also about sort of performed masculinity, in the sense that Hugo is the son of the clan's chief and needs to sort of live up to that expectation, even though Lucia is the Karya clan chief is female, is a woman. There's still that sort of specter of patriarchal sort of like hegemony or whatever, sort of holding on top of the space, because it's just a space in a JRPG, and JRPGs by their nature tend to be largely patriarchal, among other things, right? So Chris and Hugo both struggle with living up to embodied ideals of masculinity, and then on top of that, I think we head this way. I want to head to the lake castle. On top of that, they also have to deal with the fact that they're just struggling to be protagonists. That's one of the reasons why Hugo's chapters are so close to strict JRPG form, is that they're sort of using that form to examine what it means to be a leader, or what it means to just be a fully self-actualized individual. And for a while, Hugo's not going to get it, right? Same thing with Chris. Chris is going to be content to sort of play within the bounds of a system that doesn't really acknowledge her fundamental worth. Hugo is going to play into sort of that same notion, but on a more metatextual level, where Hugo is sort of struggling to live up to the embodied ideal of what a Japanese role-playing RPG protagonist is. And we get to sort of examine his flaws through micro-examinations of that form, sort of like we did when we had that whole side story Saturday morning cartoon escapade sequence with the children from Vine dels Exe. So there are two characters who are talking about very similar things, or whose gameplay and story are talking about similar things on a broader thematic level, but because there's so much more personal stuff at play for each character, it feels unique. And the nice thing about that is that you can sort of sit back and say, well, you can look at all these differences, or you can look at the similarities, and that's sort of another thing that's really thematically cogent. This idea of, let's run away and heal. This idea of having, okay, well, Chris and Hugo are basically struggling with the same issues, and the only thing that separates them is their nationality, really, right? And but for the grace of God, or whatever, right, or whatever force, society, or something broader and larger than that, for whatever twist of fate, these are people who are going to be on the opposite sides of a conflict, and they're going to have to reconcile those differences between each other while figuring out where the similarities lie. And that's sort of reinforced a lot within the themes of each of their stories. Sometimes this is reinforced mechanically. So an example of this is that Chris and Hugo are among some of the only characters who can be mounted warriors, right? I mean, like characters who ride mounts into battle. Chris is on her horse, and Hugo can ride Fubar. And so you have a knight or JRPG protagonist riding into battle on their trusty steed, or mount, like Griffin or whatever, and the small touches of flair change, but those are like cultural affectations. Underlying that, it's still like when Chris is on a horse, she plays the same way that Hugo does on Fubar, essentially, anyway. And again, there are these points of similarity and these points of contact between these two characters, and they just sort of intersect back and forth a little bit, and then maybe they find themselves within the narrative or not. So, now that I've rambled with varying degrees of cogency on that topic, which we might return to later. So, it says, hey, I took a wrong turn. No, we didn't. I intentionally came here. I forgot that I could have came here with Gedo. So we are heading to the lake castle, which is important, sort of. It becomes important to the larger plot later on as a location, and we can spend more time here. And we're mostly coming here so that I can start unlocking additional party members. So we head to this castle. Where are we? I don't know. Oh, gotta run off. She runs off. We don't know what it's called. I know what it's called. Some of you might. But we're going to walk in to meet with the Lord of the Castle, Thomas, who is actually the Tenkai star of the game. And if you're familiar with some of the discussion we had in the last segment, the Tenkai star tends to be the one who's the leader of, like, an army and stuff. And in this case, it's a little different. Thomas is one of the other point of view characters that we can play as. And I haven't decided whether or not we will play Thomas's chapters. It's really hard for me to figure out if I want to, because his chapters are nice, but I don't know how much they add to the sort of direct story that we want to focus on. But Thomas, as a character, is interesting to me, because under normal sort of Suikoden formal conventions, he would be the leader of whatever allied army emerges or anything, right? But he's not going to be. It's not like he's going to be like Tyr or Rio from the first two games, or Laszlo from the fourth, or the Prince from the fifth, or anything like that. Instead, what he will provide is sort of a neutral ground and a place of a point of connection, literally, with this castle for everyone to sort of intersect and interact. So he says, this land was made into common land by Grassland and Zexen through an old agreement. Common land? Never before heard of that. What's going on? And Thomas, timid, but he'll grow into his role. So the land is common land that is only ruled by some of Zexen's laws. So he all feels like something has gone wrong because Chris has shown up, but she doesn't know about it. But the idea is that there's this hunk of land between Zexen and Grassland that is essentially neutral in the sense that it doesn't have to hold up to every particular standard. And so Thomas and everyone have turned it into a place for business. They are letting businesses onto the land without getting approval from the Zexen Council, the Trade Council. Aha, look, economics and all that stuff coming into play, right? In order to maintain hold over this castle, they sort of did it out of survival. Let's draw people onto this land and allow them to sort of trade here at this crossroads between Zexen and the Grasslands, regardless of whether or not this is lawful or not. And Chris even says it here. The council has no place controlling business like this far out from Zexen. Like, what they know doesn't hurt them. It's just this plot of Zexen land in the middle of the Grasslands, but Thomas is going to turn it into this big opportune space for sort of cultural cross-pollination. Right? And we'll see that as things move on, and that's why I'm sort of interested in playing as Thomas, because seeing the nuances of how that plays out is kind of fun. Plus his chapters are a little light in terms of tone, and that's always great. But coming here as Chris, for instance, gives us a better understanding of how Chris deals with some of her responsibilities. Well, the council is coming down on her since the negotiations broke down. She's in this position of authority where she could, in theory, report back and say, hey, there are these people out here who are not doing things by the book. But she says, I'm not going to do that. So Chris is somebody who's in a position of power in this instance and chooses to sort of not wield it and defer away from it. And instead just sort of says, like, hey, work hard, do what you can. Like, she's very supportive of Thomas in sort of a distant sense. But you see, we come here and we can now play Thomas's story. We'll figure out if that's something we're going to do. I mean, there's also 108 characters to get in this game, and luckily, unlike other games, none of them are missable, to the best of my understanding. So, if we get all of those characters, we will unlock another viewpoint, which we will absolutely play. For Thomas, that's still in the air. But getting this castle area unlocked and having this dialogue sort of brings in some economic stuff into the game, and then also just sort of gives us a space to return to, for all of our characters to return to. Not quite a hub, but something approaching that sort of level of familiarity and comfort. And we'll be able to send characters that we find to this place, and then they'll sort of join our larger roster of characters for use. For a while, only characters that we find, we'll only be able to use certain characters for certain protagonists. Basically, if I find them in Chris's story, I can only use them in Chris's story. If I find them in Ghetto's story, I can only use them in Ghetto's story, etc., etc. Until all of those stories finally converge, which they will, and that's not a major spoiler or anything like that. But instead, first off, giant spiders, let's fight them. Instead of just sort of having one set of characters or anything like that, or one set of gosh, I lost my train of thought. But instead of sort of having maybe one set of characters for each protagonist, or like one hub city to return to for each protagonist, or anything like that, hypothetically, Vine Dels Exe for Chris, and then Caleria for Ghetto, and someplace else for Hugo. Instead, we have sort of this free space, this free space at the Lake Castle to have all these characters converge, which is not some massive bit of playing with the conventional form of JRPGs, but what it is a nice shift of sort of what happens in most Suikoden games, where it's like, for a while you just wander and you don't have this home base or castle to go back to. And here we have access to it relatively early, but we don't sort of comprehend its importance early enough. I took a wrong turn, did I not? Oh well. It's easy to get turned around. We will sort of make our way to the next area, and we'll stop for this episode. This episode sort of being casual. Even though we started to talk about some things about the game again, which was great to sort of jump back and do that. So this episode might run a little long. Why did it take so long to get back to Suikoden, Heather? So around the time that we were doing this series, I was in between day jobs, right? I wasn't in between writing. I was still writing, but I was in between day jobs, and day jobs are important because they give you healthcare and other things that you sort of need to survive, particularly if you are somebody who has to deal a lot with doctors like me. That's just sort of how it is. And so I got a new job. And I like it generally, but that meant doing a lot of work right around the holiday season, which took up most of my free time. And that free time that I did have had to be dedicated towards writing, because my writing has started to pick up significantly. I'm writing for more outlets, I'm writing more often, I'm doing reviews. Reviews take a lot more time than you would imagine, at least depending on which game. I had to review The Witness, and that is a long and complicated puzzle game, which we were given like no hints on, so I had to beat The Witness in like relatively short order in order to review it, but that still took days of playtime. So the more I got involved with other aspects of content creation and writing, the less time it left for this series. But now I have a little bit of time, so I can balance it out. Also, I started up a Patreon, which meant I had to spend more time focusing on those videos. So the Fallout 4 mini crit and Let's Remember Skygunner, which I'm so glad I got Let's Remember Skygunner out and working. Just a huge relief to get that series started again. But now that I have a little bit of downtime, I can sort of try and brute force and crash my way through this game quickly. Also, I'm going to go talk to a skill trainer while I can. And there's one inside, I believe, although it's been a while. Who are you? What are you doing back here? Oh, you are admiring the night. I thought they were You know they're not important because they don't have a portrait next to their face, but, oh, it takes me straight out to the other side. I can't even go inside the castle. Okay, never mind. So I'm not going to worry about skill trainers for now. The point is, things were busy. And these are not sponsored videos. These are not things I have to do for work. This series, playing through Suikoden 3, is just something I'm doing because I want to play through Suikoden 3 again. Oh, now I'm inside. Great. I am a silly, silly, silly person. I don't remember where the skill trainer is. It's been a while since I've played this game. So basically, I just had so much stuff to do, and I would come home from work, and I'd be very, very tired. And in theory, I probably could have sat down and churned these out, but if I'm going to do stuff for you guys, I don't want to be doing it at 4 a.m, barely able to talk to you about sort of what's going on or anything like that. I want to be able to sit back and say, like, hey, I will be able to talk well about these things. What do we want to do? So let's do more armor. More damage. Yeah, basically just, there was so much going on. There was a lot going on, and this just fell by the wayside. I have a series on Doom and Chex Quest that I am almost a year late on. So here's the thing. When I start something, I will always finish it. I will leave nothing unfinished. But that doesn't mean I'll get it done right away. Now that I am sort of able to navigate my personal schedule a little better, more Suikoden 3. I'm also going to front load my session this today by playing through maybe multiple chapters. We will find out. However, it's good to be back, and it's good to be talking about these things, and we're going to level up our characters. We're going to reunite with the rest of the knights and sort of move on from there, because we are being sent to the front for storyline purposes that are vague outside of, oh, the council are jerks who sort of don't value soldiers' lives. Oh, you just had this terrible incident, well, we're going to send you right back out there. Which is noteworthy in and of itself, maybe with what it says about how the powers that be treat soldiers. But, you know, the game doesn't focus on it too much. But, okay, let's see. Who's this? Is this Belle? Because this will be like our first recruiting scene. Yeah, this is Belle and her robot. What are you doing with that barrel? He's a fucking robot. Anything I can do to help? Find the screw that was lost. She says, I hope a monster didn't pick it up. You know what? No, I changed my mind because I'm changeable, and we are going to recruit on the side. And for now, I'm going to say goodbye to all of you, and I will see you in the next segment. I know not a lot happened story-wise, but we did some good discussion. We talked about sort of where things are going to go from here in terms of what I want for this series. And I'm really happy to be back doing this. So thank you all for watching. I love you all very much, and we'll get this going. This is so cool. It's so great to be back, to be playing a game that I enjoy, one that lets me talk about cool stuff, and to sort of spend more time with you. I hope you see these as sort of relaxing. That's what I would like them to be, more than anything else. I want the things I do to be relaxing, approachable, stimulating to be sure, but still just experiences that you sort of walk away from having enjoyed. So I hope you have enjoyed this. Be well. I love you, my little darling baby birds. I will see you in the next segment. Bye!